I'm Councilman Mark Cuthbertson, and I am delighted today to be here with the crew of the James Joseph. We're going to talk about a fateful day 20 years ago on 9/11 and the efforts of this captain and crew. I want to introduce Captain James Snyder, who is here, Captain James Peterson, retired Suffolk County PD Scott McDonald, Christian Four, Manny Mr. X, Pyros, and John Lowe. So 20 years ago, 9/11, obviously the crew, captain and crew took part in what is, the largest boat evacuation in history, bigger than Dunkirk, and love to hear you relate more about that day and your recollection of that day, kicking off with Captain James.
Yeah, it was actually the crew was assembled. The guys, they became crew that day, but the way that everybody came together was through a series of cell phones, which of course were larger at that time, the giant ones with no cameras, and the marine radio. But it happened so quickly that we got everybody assembled, and I guess each guy had their own way that they found out that we were going. And to me, one of the amazing things was like who said yes and who said no. And to me, just to have guys that were willing to go there, that put themselves, the need of others, which a lot of times you'll see on the water, guys that argue and fight with each other the whole time. Once something goes on with another vessel or something like that, all the bickering goes out the window, and you make sure that person goes to safety. And pretty much that day, I mean, we had skin in the game with Jake being in there and my brother, so we were basically heading in for one of our own to begin with, and then we were asked from the Coast Guard, to try to join in the evacuation. And it was a tremendous effort from the ferries, the tugboats, there was party boats, charter boats, and of course the Coast Guard and every type of maritime law enforcement imaginable.
Tell us a little bit about Jake and his story, because I know that's important to this.
Jake was a crew member whose mother came down to the boat when he was 11 years old and said, "My son's on this boat almost every day, and I'm paying for it. Wouldn't it be better if he worked on the boat?" So usually we don't hire anybody unless the person calls themselves and asks for a job. But he was 11, and we gave him a little side job scrubbing the buckets out. And after that, we couldn't get rid of him, and he was a fixture there up until the day before he perished. He actually worked the night before and the weekend before he passed away. And he slept on my couch. We went on road trips together. We hunted and fished, and all of us knew him. And he was quite the character.
When you talk about putting yourself at peril, I don't think anyone could have imagined the level of sickness and afterwards, and people with 9/11 related cancer. And of course, we want to remember two crew members who are deceased, Ted Schwartz and Ted Schmidt, who died of 9/11 related illnesses. And tell us a little bit about them.
Yeah, well, Teddy had, both of them had the cancers, but Teddy went pretty fast from a 9/11 kidney cancer that they found a lot of down there that they attributed to the asbestos and the concrete. And Teddy Schmidt actually was a retired New York City fireman who was a lobsterman in his retirement and went back in and was actually working on the pile. So, along with Manny, who went back in as a union dock builder and also got onto the pile and worked for months after that, Teddy Schmidt was in on the pile and subjected himself to a tremendous amount of those toxins. And Teddy Schwartz was a character, and he hung in there with us when he was down to one kidney, and he worked till a couple of weeks before he passed away. We've been lucky. I only had 2 eye infections. The next day, both my eyes were infected, but there was 3/4 of an inch of that toxic dust on the boat the next day. And why we probably were more lucky than other people was that we were on the 34th Street side. In the beginning, we did go around the Battery side, but the wind direction had a lot to do with, who was in trouble after and who wasn't. And maybe the people that were saved most directly from the boat lift itself at Hull were the people that were taken off that island that so rapidly that they didn't have to stay and ingest all that smoke. Because now we're over 4,000 people who have perished from separate diseases from September 11th, after the fact of the attack. So the people that all were taken off from the vessels, if they would have had to wait for some other kind of transportation, you would be talking in unbelievable amount of numbers that would have passed away from different types of disease.
Yeah, it's amazing, and an important point to hammer home is that it wasn't as much saving lives getting people off the island, it was saving people's lives because of the toxicity in the air that nobody knew anything about at the time.
Yeah, I mean, people had various heart conditions. People, there were people having heart attacks, there were panic, there were people running into the water before we arrived. And we were getting the stories related from, we had a friend who was a Nassau County Marine police officer who was ahead of us. My brother was a detective. So we were getting constant updates about what was going on, as we arrived on scene. And our situation getting in there was expedited thanks to, of course, Manny's banishment to a separate channel. So
Manny, tell us about that relationship and what it meant on that day.
I mean, there was a lot of people doing the same thing we're doing with their Hatteras and their Egg Harbors, going to get their families and family friends or whoever. I mean, there was so many people coming from the east, going west. You made it under the Throgs, you made it under the Williamsburg, and then the blockade is right there at Rikers and LaGuardia Airport, these two islands, and that's when the East River gets narrow. And Hunts Point's right to the north, in the west. And so that's where the blockade was. And I was, Jimmy says, banished. I was working dual with another lobster captain. We had two lobster boats. And our channel, we all used to be on, was very congested. There had to be like 20 guys on it. So I went to a special channel, I think it was channel 81 or 87. It was a very high power channel where it was called the 773. The 773 was a dispatcher from Edgewater, New Jersey. And he had this powerful radio. He can communicate with tugboats as far as Boston and Philadelphia up the Hudson, Long Island Sound. And I talked to him. I said, listen, we got firemen, police officers. We got a boat here with tons of cases of water. Well, we got masks and gloves. We want to go and help and get people off the battery. And he says, no problem. He made a phone call to the pilot boat that was the blockade boat at Rikers Island. And that's how they let us in. Jimmy was on 22 and channel 16, which are the Coast Guard channels. And they stopped a bunch of people, over 100 people behind us. We were the only boat that went through. That's a true story. And we went through, and all you heard was sirens. We went under all the bridges, and there's people checking to see if there's any kind of mines or bombs, and it was just seeing fighter jets flying through. It was horrendous. It was.
It must, right, when you look back on it, it must have just be sensory overload, right? I mean, there's so many sights, sounds, and things, and the strangeness of it all. Captain Peterson, tell us your recollections of that day.
I mean, I just remember we were fishing off of Norwalk. I was actually the deckhand that day when Captain James was running the boat, and he got the phone call from his brother that said a plane had hit the trade tower, and we looked over and we could see the smoke billowing out and everything. And then from that point on, it was pretty surreal. It was just kind of going through the motions, not really realizing what was happening. And at first, you kind of thought it was some kind of pilot error or some kind of huge mistake. But then, the events unfolded. There was more to it and what was going on. And then when James said we were going in and that they would need people to go into the city, because I had no family that was in need of my assistance for anything, I'm like, absolutely, let's go. I had nobody that needed my help directly in my family, so I said, let me go do anything I can to help out. And at that point, we had no idea what it was we would see, what we were doing, what we'd be involved in, but I said, let's go and do whatever we can to help out.
That's great. Any one person or one moment that day stick out in your memory?
When we first got down to the west part of the East River, and when you could see the towers up close and the smoke and the smell. That is something that I'll just never ever forget. There was just a smell that I can't describe what it was of, everything that was just burning in the city, and just that odor that was there. That's something that stings my nostrils for the rest of my life.
I'm going to go to Scott McDonald as, obviously many perspectives, but certainly that of a police officer who was on the boat that day. Any recollections that you have?
Well, it was two things. That day, just prior to meeting up with Jim, one of your and I favorite places was on the golf course when the first hit. And I was playing at Tam O'Shanter with Ed Smith, the starter from the club. And we didn't know what was going on. I was my day off from the police department. So long story short, I went back home, I called the precinct. I'm like, what's going on? And nobody seemed to know in Suffolk. We're standing by. I said, okay, but they said, be ready to mobilize, because that's usually the next step. Everybody has to be on duty, even if they're off duty. So Jim had called me, said, you close? I said, yeah, I'm coming in. So I went down to the dock, called the precinct back. I said, long story short, I'm going in on the boat. I said, is this permissible? Do I need to be home? They said, no, we haven't made any plans. We're still standing by. Because Nassau, just to jump back a little bit, responded immediately. Yeah. So Suffolk didn't go to full mobilization till 24 hours later. So many years later, someone said to me, you were the first Suffolk cop to be going to Suffolk, and you were off duty. And they said, that all figures. But I think that was the feeling that I got from that day, because I didn't feel like a cop, only personally because I had started in New York City, and then I was in Suffolk for a long time. But the heavy thing was once when Manny and James talks about getting through that first checkpoint at Rikers Island, things started flooding, like hitting me. I'm like, what's going on? The eerie silence, the smell, the taste of the metal when we got down in our mouths when we got down by the battery. But I'm thinking about what was happening. It was so unrealistic. I hate the word surreal, it's overused. But the F-18s flying over and helpless. But the main thing I thought that everybody here were fishermen or had some prior, the volunteer firemen, a private law enforcement, everybody just went together. And I'm a military veteran, and I've been in combat, and I've been in the police department and the other stuff, and I never saw a better team of guys. Just, what do you need us to do? And it was very calm, it was very well done. I thought it was quite something, and at the time I didn't really think much of it, and everyone's saying that I worked with, I got back to the precinct, then I actually went back there as a Suffolk cop, official capacity. But they're like, we can't believe you went down. I said, you can't believe the guys I went with. I said, they're better than most of the guys I've known through my years at the different places. But I think that was the biggest thing, the way everybody worked together, and James and Malcolm, and everyone just knew what to do. They're like they were either, like they were born to do it. And I think they should all be very proud. And it was a bad, everybody's had a bad feeling because everybody knew someone there. And I think that when you're in a catastrophic situation like that, that really, you don't feel it till later. But if you start to think about it, you can never really react or help or be a benefit to someone there. And my uncle was a captain in the McAllister, in the tugboat captain, and he mentioned James and he goes, the best guy, and he always has been a fisherman, but his livelihood was the fishing boat, the tugboats. And he said, there's nobody better than the fishing guys. I said, yeah. He goes, they just don't ask questions and they'll work till they drop. And I think that's, very commendable. And that's what I take away most, was how well and how hard everybody worked and never complained and never said to James, when are we leaving?
John, What are your recollections of that day?
It's funny, it was a day a lot like today. It was one of those early fall days, one of the first days that kind of felt like fall. Christian and I were working on my charter boat at the time, and we were home that day. And I just remember getting a call from Christian after watching this, unfold on TV and everything. And he said, Jimmy's trying to put a crew together to go in. And so we raced over there. And, again, surreal was a word that's really used too much, but in this case, I think it applies. No aircraft traffic, which is odd for this area. And just seeing that plume of smoke coming out of the building, as we closed in on the city, and then once we passed the checkpoint and getting in there, and that smell, and one thing that really kind of struck me is to see all the paperwork that was in the river. As we moved through the river, you'd see paper, and it really made you think about that. That's associated with somebody that just went down in that building, and just seeing the folks coming off the island, covered in that dust. The majority of them were quite calm. But the way the boat worked and the crew worked together, and it really, to move a lot of people off, I don't know, Lord only knows how many trips we made back and forth, but...
Just to give some context, when did you start and when did the day end?
Depends on his head
To start, we saw the second building fall. We were probably off Bayville when the second building went down. And we got in,
Tower 7 was on fire.
they put us, and Building 7 was still on fire.
Yeah.
And they put us at 34th Street. And then when we went around the backside later on, they started to do like a fireman and policeman thing because after the bulk of the people were moved. So they had us up on the 34th Street side. And I explained when we were at the dock how we made our own exit point on the Queens side. Manny had cut the bolt, and we had a perfect dock. It was a brand new dock with 2 gates on a construction site that was supposed to be closed to anybody. But as everything was going that day, we were allowed to wing it. We didn't ask permission, but we cut the bolt, swung the gates open, and the people, it was just like they were walking down this tunnel to get away. And we stayed. We didn't get back to Huntington until the morning, until after in the dark. It was towards the morning. But as we were leaving, because I guess I've been up for about 17 hours already, and we had Malcolm, me and James and Malcolm, John were the captains of the day, but Malcolm was in the wheelhouse with me most of the day. And as we departed, I fell asleep at the wheel of the boat. We were leaving and we were approaching the checkpoint. And luckily he saw me nod out. And when I talked to him recently, he was departing on a 7-day trip up in Rhode Island. And the thing that stuck out to Malcolm was, he said, don't forget about the time, when you almost drove into the island. He says, because I was next to you. And the picture that you put which nicely projects me and my red hair that I don't have anymore, and Malcolm holding the wheel with his white socks on and his shorts. That picture came from when Malcolm pushed me out of the way as I was falling asleep and said, you can't run this boat anymore. So me, James, and Malcolm had, before that, broke up the wheel time on the way in, and we ran the boat a lot harder than we usually, ran it. And but Malcolm pretty much saved our day by watching me fall asleep and taking the wheel.
When you were taking people off of Manhattan, where were you taking them to?
Directly across, I guess it would be Astoria. I would guess the closest point that I knew was Astoria. There was a pier there, and it was a new construction there. And off to the left, you would see the 59th Street Bridge, and on the other side, you'd see the tanks over on the
It
Brooklyn
was
side.
like between Long Island City and Astoria.
Right.
Where the old Coca-Cola.
Right, the
Yeah,
old Coca-Cola
Coca-Cola
factory.
sign.
And there
That's
was,
exactly what it was.
I could find the pier. I mean, I could go back there tomorrow and go to the end of the pier and see what's there. But I remember distinctly going up and talking on the radio with the other captains and watching the pilings that were under the water, because the Nassau County boat had just clipped both his wheels. They put themselves out of commission by knocking both wheels off the boat. So when we had a good spot, we marked it on the piling. And all the boats there did substantial damage to themselves. to the point where now they have a terrorist clause in your insurance policy. And if you want, you have to sign a waiver if you don't want the terrorism clause. And that came from that day.
How many trips do you think you made back and forth?
It's a blank, and I couldn't even tell you. I don't even know. I mean, I don't know the exact number. You know, we were actually, guys, when we got around the Battery side, the tugboats were more in charge, and you had to battle your way in. We did more when we were on the 34th Street charge, when we did our own thing. And we called it when we wanted to call it. We didn't wait for a certain amount of people. You know, they came in droves, and people would run, wait for me, and then walk up to the boat and go. But when it slowed down later in the afternoon, that's when we went around the backside. And finally, they called it, you know, late in the night. And that was the end of it. But it was, some of the trips, you know, were heavy in the beginning, and they were lighter later on.
Christian, maybe you can tell us about the day as well. I know your father is a part of that, and tell us that aspect of the story.
Yep, my main recollection of that day was, like John said, we had been fishing offshore out of Montauk, doing charters for a bunch of days, and I had actually been sleeping late that day. And I remember my phone just kept ringing and ringing and ringing, and finally I got up out of bed and said, you know, who is this, you know? And someone said, turn on the TV. I turned the TV on just in time to see the second plane go into the tower. And the next thing they said was, where's your father? My father worked on the 104th floor of the World Trade Center for Cantor Fitzgerald. He, every Labor Day, him and another guy would switch the vacation. One guy would take the weeks before, one guy would take the weeks after. This just happened to be my dad's year not to be off on the week of September 11th. Everybody else that he worked with for 30 years, everybody died. There was one other survivor from his municipal bond department, a young girl named Whitney Siderman, and she was the only other survivor. She was on her honeymoon when it happened. But I mean, that was my main thing, you know, the fact that my father was still alive. And my first thing I thought of was to get down to the boat area. And I remember I ran down to Riggs's bait shop, and that's when I called John, after James said he was putting a crew together. And yeah, it was, everybody just convened down there. And then I remember going in on the boat, and again, not to beat a dead horse, but surreal is without a doubt a way to describe this. One of my main memories was being down there, and actually you can see flames leaping across the streets, like something you would have seen in a zombie movie, an apocalypse movie, you know. And then even leaving, I remember seeing the Brooklyn Bridge behind us with the lone American flag up on top of that bridge, and just the smoke and the clouds and just the absolute chaos that was going on. I mean, it was just unbelievable, something that I know you never get over. It's always in the back of your head. Every year on September 11th, when the stuff comes on TV, it gets harder and harder to watch. It brings me back to that moment where the people were calling in the morning saying, where's your father? And then the realization hits you that my father would have been dead. I wouldn't have a father anymore if he wasn't on vacation. He went to memorial service after memorial service after memorial service for men that he worked with. You know, his kids were grown at this point. Men that he worked with kids that were 5 years old, 6 years old, kids that were just graduating high school, all gone in a flash. I mean, the guys that he worked with were the guys that were jumping out of the building. Those were the guys. So still to this day, September 11th is a very hard day for me. I'm very fortunate. My family's very, very lucky. My dad was actually at the Trade Center for both bombings. And, you know, some people call him the luckiest man alive. And he's doing well. He, you know, like I said, he really went to a ton of memorial services. He has a very hard time hearing bagpipes nowadays. But, yeah, other than that, I mean, that was just that was the main thing that day for me. It makes September 11th still a hard day for me because all those feelings come back of like that, just the feeling of like, oh my God, if this had just been a different year or another day, you know, my father would not be with us anymore. And to get the man that he switched the weekends with was a man named Joe Capo. He had a son that was my age. I think we were 21, 22 at the time. he immediately went and joined the armed forces and got into the special forces. And as far as I know, he is still over there fighting for us.
Amazing. Just so many amazing stories. Bill, all the way from Colorado, joining us. Thank you for being here. And you were close by, but I'm sure it was there still was a decision to be made whether to join the crew that day.
Yeah, I was at the bait shop, and I had the TV on behind me, and just watching the towers go down, I felt helpless, probably like everybody else did. I was watching it go, on the television. Captain James came in, started, I could see him come in. I walked over, we started talking with everybody, got the crew together. We headed in and felt like I was in the right spot with the right crew, and it became real. Christian, just said it before, is where we're going underneath the Brooklyn Bridge, that lone American flag on the Brooklyn Bridge. I happened to be up on the Fly Bridge, staring at the Brooklyn Bridge in black smoke, and all of a sudden you couldn't see the flag, all of a sudden you would see it, and then it became real. And then, just like everybody else says, and it kind of was like you were horrified, and what we did is almost like a blank I haven't thought about in a while, but, I moved away pretty much the December after 9/11 to Colorado, and, I'm fourth generation Huntington. Definitely want to say thank you to everybody for putting this whole show together. I grew up clamming, fishing with these guys, and having my name put down in Huntington Harbor with these great men here. That I wouldn't have missed this for the world.
It is pretty cool, because my family also, on my mother's side, has been in Huntington for a very, very, very long time. In fact, my great-great-grandfather, I don't know if it's enough greats or not, but actually worked in the mill pond in the back of Puppy's Cove years and years and years and years and years and years ago. But to be able to have, like Billy said, to have my name and our names of this crew on a plaque in Huntington Harbor, a place like, grew up fishing with my father there since I was, before I could remember, been on the water there for most of my life. What an amazing place. But to be part of that history now is a pretty amazing feeling. Like, again, I don't think any of us thought that we'd all be sitting here right now being interviewed by you for what we did. Like, we all went in there because, I feel like we all had a little bit of skin in the game. We all wanted to, really, do our part and help people out. It was a mixture of shock, depression, and just honestly downright anger.
Yeah.
I mean, there was downright anger about what happened.
It was the mixture of guys, and I've known John Lowe since kindergarten. Like, John was always the guy on the playground who would keep the bullies from going after anybody who was, weaker at the time, and always calm and just like a quieter, tougher guy. And then, I had professional captains with me. We had all the help we needed, and really there was amongst us, the fear never entered into the picture. It was more that everybody wanted to get there to try to get to Jake, and to try to do whatever we could.
Get him home.
And, Manny, people gave Manny a hard time throughout his whole life, and, I said, well, Manny, will always be, close with me because we're linked up for that day, and we've been friends, since we were 16 years old. But all of us are all linked together by the fact that these are the guys that said yes. In a time and a space in the country where people are not sure what they want to do for their country, these guys never hesitated for a minute. They all went exactly in the direction that everybody else was trying to get away from.
Well, it's really you deserve to be acknowledged in perpetuity, and it's really been our honor and privilege to do that and put together this program. So thank you so much for what you did and being a part of this.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's an honor.